Just one spilled cup of coffee, and two people from completely different worlds collided. A girl surviving in New York through three part-time jobs. A cold billionaire CEO with a life of power and precision. They disliked each other from the very first moment, yet fate kept pulling them back into the same rhythm. This is a love story that seemed impossible until it became the most beautiful thing they had ever known. The bell above the cafe door gave a tired jingle as the wind swept in behind Alexander Blackwood. Rain clung to the collar of his tailored overcoat, droplets sliding down the lapel like reluctant regrets. He stepped inside without glancing at anyone, his sharp eyes flicking toward the least crowded corner of the room. With a sigh barely audible, he slid into a worn leather armchair and placed his briefcase on the table. He hated places like this. Grimy wood floors, chalkboard menus, the faint smell of cinnamon and burnt espresso. But he had needed somewhere, anywhere, that was not the sterile conference room or the black SUV outside. Somewhere anonymous, quiet, forgettable. Across the room, Ellie Davies darted between tables with practiced urgency. Her ponytail had come slightly undone in the rush, and the sleeves of her worn denim shirt were rolled up to the elbows, revealing a thin silver bracelet and a small burn scar from a steam wand. In one hand, she balanced a tray with two cappuccinos, a slice of banana bread, and a shot of espresso. As she turned, someone called her name behind the counter. "Ellie, table 6 is asking for soy milk, again." She half turned to respond, just as her sneaker caught the edge of a slick tile. The tray tipped forward. A gasp escaped her lips, but not fast enough. The espresso shot tumbled first, then one of the cappuccinos followed, sloshing over the rim as it flew, and landed squarely on Alexander's open laptop. A sharp crack filled the air as porcelain met metal. The room froze for half a second. Ellie dropped the tray with a dull clatter. "Oh my," she breathed, eyes wide. "I am so sorry. What the hell just happened?" Alexander's voice cut through the silence like a blade. He stood up, eyes narrowing at the mess in front of him. His laptop, a sleek black machine likely worth more than Ellie's month's rent, hissed with a dying electric whine. "I did not mean to," she started. "You poured boiling coffee on my laptop," he said, his tone clipped. Exactly what part of that is an accident? Ellie's spine straightened. She had heard that tone before, from bankers, from rude customers, from people who thought tips were charity. She took a breath. "You were the one sitting with your stuff practically hanging off the edge of the table. Maybe if you did not claim half the cafe like it was your personal office, this wouldn't have happened." He blinked, clearly not used to being talked to like that. "Excuse me?" "No, excuse me," she said, folding her arms. "But unless you plan to sue the floor for being wet, maybe try talking to people like they are human beings. Do you even know what that machine cost?" "I do not care," she replied. "And if it is so priceless, maybe do not take it out in a cafe without a case, genius." Gasps and a few stifled chuckles stirred in the room. Alexander's jaw tightened. He grabbed a napkin and began blotting the keyboard with precise, sharp movements, though it was clear the damage was done. Ellie stooped to gather the broken porcelain, cheeks burning. Not with shame, she had cleaned worse spills, but with the adrenaline of having gone toe-to-toe with a man who looked like he had stepped out of a boardroom in Manhattan and walked straight into a disaster. A disaster with her name on it. "Your manager will hear about this," he muttered as he stood, slinging the wet laptop under one arm. She smiled, cold and unapologetic. "Tell her I said hi." He looked at her, his eyes briefly searching for something. Anger, defiance, maybe even regret, but found none, only steel. Then he turned and walked out into the rain, leaving behind a silence thicker than steam and the faint, bitter scent of espresso. Ellie exhaled finally and whispered under her breath, "What an ass." Outside, the rain had softened to a persistent drizzle, and the cafe returned to its usual rhythm. A low hum of conversation, the hiss of steaming milk, the occasional clink of ceramic. Ellie stood behind the counter now, arms crossed, jaw tight. The adrenaline from the argument was fading, leaving behind a strange hollow in her chest. Not quite guilt, not quite anger. Something in between. She glanced out the window just in time to see the man in the charcoal coat disappear into a waiting black car. Even soaked from the storm, he looked untouchable, like the kind of person whose worst day still smelled faintly of expensive cologne and power. "You okay?" her coworker asked, nudging her with an elbow. Peachy, Ellie muttered. She tied her apron tighter and went back to wiping down tables, pretending her hands were steadier than they were. Upstairs, in the back of the sleek black car, Alexander sat in silence. The ruined laptop sat beside him like a corpse. His phone buzzed in his coat pocket. Messages from legal, an update from the Singapore office. 2 missed calls from someone he had been actively ignoring. He did not answer any of them. Instead, he stared at the droplets sliding across the car window. His reflection stared back. Sharp jawline, impeccable grooming, a man carved out of steel and good breeding. But he could still hear the barista's voice in his head. Maybe try talking to people like they are human beings. He scoffed under his breath. She had nerve, that girl. Clumsy, combative. Clearly not suited for customer service, but also not afraid to look a man like him in the eye and tell him off. That was rare. And annoying. He hated rare and annoying in equal measure. The car pulled into the underground garage of Blackwood Tower, a monolith of glass and silence. Alexander stepped out and walked through the lobby without speaking to anyone. The security guard nodded. The receptionist greeted him. He offered neither smile nor pause. By the time he reached the elevator, his mask was back in place. Up on the 42nd floor, the world was quiet, sterile, curated, desks aligned in perfect symmetry, meetings booked down to the minute, staff who never spoke out of turn. It was exactly as he had built it. And yet he sat in his glass office, watching the clouds gather again over the city, thinking not of board meetings or contracts, but of a girl with coffee on her hands and fire in her eyes. Meanwhile, miles away, Ellie was changing into her 3rd uniform of the day. The cafe had ended at noon. After a quick lunch from a food truck she could barely afford, she was now on her way to her next job. Afternoon receptionist at a local legal aid clinic. At 6, she would switch again, waitressing at a rooftop bar where the tips were generous if the clients were drunk enough. She changed in a cramped employee bathroom, tying her hair back with a rubber band she found at the bottom of her bag. Her reflection in the mirror looked tired but alive, resilient. She gave herself a half smile and whispered, "You've got this," before stepping out into the waiting room. There were papers to file, calls to answer, people who needed help and had no one else. Ellie liked this part of the day best, not for the pay, which was almost nothing, but for the small victories, for reminding herself she could make a difference, even if it was tiny, even if the city never seemed to notice. By the time night blanketed New York in orange haze and siren light, Alexander was standing alone on his penthouse balcony, scotch in hand, watching the grid of the city stretch endlessly below. Somewhere in that glow, the girl from the cafe was likely clocking into another job, her shoulders tired, her voice hoarse from too many hours, too few breaks. 2 lives drawn on opposite sides of the same city, 2 people not yet knowing the gravity of the collision they had just begun. Morning came too soon. Ellie rolled off the worn couch in her tiny apartment, rubbing the sleep from her eyes as the alarm on her phone buzzed its relentless tune. Her legs ached from the night shift, and her fingers still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and gin. She checked the time, 6:45 a.m., a new day, another job. The gig was supposed to be easy, a 1-day temp assignment working logistics for some fancy tech summit at the Midtown Convention Center. It paid better than usual. With a free lunch and a crisp black blazer she was allowed to borrow for the day. Ellie took it without asking questions. She needed the cash for groceries and her brother's textbook fund was looking thin again. By 8 o'clock, she was inside the bustling glass building, badge clipped to her lapel, clipboard in hand. People in suits were already lining up for registration, and a dizzying number of LED panels blinked along the walls, streaming buzzwords like innovation, scalability, and vision in an endless loop. Ellie was tasked with checking in VIP speakers and escorting them to the prep room. She kept her head down, voice polite but distant, focused on getting through the hours without incident. And then she saw the name on the printout. Alexander Blackwood, keynote speaker, 10 o'clock sharp, Auditorium A. The letters sat on the page like a dare. Ellie stared at the name for a moment too long. Her stomach twisted. Not with fear, but with that sharp, exasperated heat reserved for people who could afford to destroy your morning and forget about it before lunch. She hoped, absurdly, that maybe he would not show, that maybe someone else from his corporation would speak in his place. But of course he showed. Exactly at 9:30, a black car pulled up to the side entrance. 2 assistants emerged first, crisp and wordless. Then Alexander stepped out, dressed in a charcoal suit and a deep blue tie, as if the coffee incident had never happened. His expression was unreadable, his posture perfectly erect. There was not a single drop of surprise in his gaze, only calculation. He looked at Ellie like she was just another clipboard. She, on the other hand, stood still for a second too long. "Oh," he said coolly, adjusting his cufflink without looking at her. "You again." She forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Small city, or small talent pool," he replied without missing a beat. "Do try not to spill anything today." Her jaw clenched, but she kept her voice even. "And you try not to set anything on fire with your personality. Follow me." They walked in silence through the corridor. Ellie led him toward the prep room, the sharp click of his shoes echoing against the marble floor. A few tech interns whispered behind them, pointing and nudging each other. Alexander's reputation was clearly larger than the man himself. Inside the room, she handed him the speaker schedule. He took it without acknowledgement. "If you need water, it's in the corner. Microphone check starts in 10. He glanced at her. "Do you know what I am going to say in there?" She arched an eyebrow. "I imagine it involves a lot of the word disruption." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You are quick. And you are exhausting." Their eyes locked for a fraction of a second too long. Something flickered. Not quite electricity, more like a distant thunderstorm no one wanted to admit was approaching. Ellie turned on her heel and walked out without another word. In the hallway, her heart beat a little faster, and she told herself it was just the coffee. Just adrenaline. Just another day with someone who thought the world spun because he told it to. But deep down, something in her already knew. This was not the last time their paths would cross. And next time, neither of them would walk away unscathed. Ellie told herself she would not see him again after the tech summit. It had been a one-day contract after all, an annoying detour on the long road of temp jobs. She had walked away from the convention center with sore feet, a tense jaw, and a mental note to avoid any building with his company's logo for the foreseeable future. But New York had a cruel sense of humor. 2 weeks later, her agency called with a short-term assignment, a month-long position filling in for a communications coordinator on medical leave. Corporate setting, good pay, downtown office. She said yes before hearing the company name. She regretted it the moment she stepped into the elevator of Blackwood Global. The receptionist handed her a lanyard and gestured toward a desk near the back of the open floor. Ellie kept her head down, praying for invisibility. With any luck, he would not even remember her. That hope disintegrated the moment she walked into the morning meeting. Alexander sat at the head of the long conference table, sharp as ever in a tailored navy suit, reviewing the quarterly pitch deck. His gaze barely lifted as she entered, but a slight, almost imperceptible smirk curved the corner of his mouth. "Well," he murmured, "I see human resources is truly embracing chaos these days." Ellie did not respond. She sat down at the far end of the table, flipped open her notebook, and made a silent promise. Survive 4 weeks, keep her mouth shut, collect the paycheck. That was all. But silence never lasted long between them. The first disagreement came over a visual layout. Ellie suggested using softer color schemes to make the report more readable, especially for non-technical clients. Alexander overruled her without hesitation. "This is not a kindergarten handout," he said. "Our investors do not need storybooks." Ellie leaned forward slightly. "Actually, clarity improves retention. But if your ego is attached to grayscale, I understand." A few interns coughed into their sleeves, hiding smiles. He blinked once slowly and moved on. The second clash came during a team presentation. Ellie pointed out a potential misalignment in the data, one that could have embarrassed the company if left untouched. Alexander corrected it, but gave no credit, offering only a curt, "Noted." Afterwards, she passed his office and heard him on the phone, praising the department's attention to detail. Not her, just the department. By the end of the second week, tension hummed between them like a live wire. He was precision. She was instinct. He followed data. She followed people. He micromanaged. She refused to be managed at all. They argued over workflows, phrasing and internal memos, the design of a company-wide email. Ellie caught herself once, fists clenched under the desk, whispering, "You are not God. You are just good at spreadsheets." She half expected to be fired the next morning. Instead, she got a new task, reviewing client-facing documents directly under his supervision. He was not trying to get rid of her. He was testing her. And the worst part? She was not failing, she was thriving, even when she hated every minute of it. Alexander, for all his unbearable control, had met his match in a girl who refused to yield. And though he would never admit it, not to himself, not to anyone, he found himself waiting for her comments in meetings, anticipating her next challenge. It was maddening and addictive. Neither of them understood it yet, but the battlefield they had built, line by line, word by word, was not about victory. It was about gravity, and it was pulling them in. The storm rolled in late on a Thursday afternoon, creeping over the city like a warning. What began as a drizzle at lunch turned into sheets of wind-lashed rain by nightfall, hammering against the high glass windows of Blackwood Tower with restless fury. By 7 o'clock, most of the staff had already packed up and escaped into the wet gray evening. Ellie had not noticed the time. She was buried in the final draft of a quarterly report, reworking a section Alexander had, of course, declared incoherent. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, mind sharp despite the ache in her shoulders. She only looked up when the lights flickered, and then she realized the office was nearly empty. She stood, walked to the window and frowned at the city drowned in water and red brake lights. Subway alerts buzzed on her phone. Delays, station closures, buses rerouted. The storm was not moving, it was settling in. Behind her footsteps, quiet, deliberate. "You are still here," Alexander said. She turned. He stood near the elevator bank, hands in his pockets, jacket off, tie loosened. Just slightly. It was the first time she had seen him without the full armor of precision. "The subway's flooded," she replied. "Figured I might as well finish the draft while I wait for the city to become navigable again." He nodded once, then looked toward the storm. "They said the river almost breached in Soho," he said quietly. "Reminds me of that blackout in 2015. I was stuck in Singapore, and the servers back here all went down. No one slept for 3 days." Ellie leaned back against the edge of the table. "Sounds like hell." "It was," he said, but there was something different in his voice. Not pride, something closer to weariness. The power flickered again. In the sudden dim, their reflections wavered against the glass. Two silhouettes, alone in a world of lightning and silence. Alexander broke it first. "You never back down." She blinked. "Is that a compliment?" He looked at her then. Really looked. "Maybe." Ellie crossed her arms. "I have worked since I was 16. Grocery store, babysitting, cleaning offices. I learned early that if you do not speak up, people walk over you, and then they forget your name." "I do not forget names," he said. "No. You remember them so you know who to intimidate in meetings." He almost smiled, almost. "That would be effective if it worked on you." "It does not," she said simply, "and I doubt it ever will." He walked to the side table where a coffee machine hummed quietly and poured them both something warm. He handed her a cup without asking how she took it. She accepted it anyway. For a while they drank in silence, listening to the rain drum against steel and glass. Then, without quite knowing why, Ellie said, "My dad left when I was 12. My mom got sick not long after. I took care of my brother. That is why I never finished college. I was supposed to be a literature major, if you can believe that." Alexander said nothing, but his hand froze for a moment on the rim of his cup. "Do you ever wonder," she continued, "if the version of you from 10 years ago would even recognize the person you have become?" He let out a quiet breath. "I was not a person 10 years ago. I was a resume." There it was. The truth, plain and sharp, falling between them like another crash of thunder outside. He looked exhausted, not in the way of someone who had worked too long, but in the way of someone who had built his life out of steel and found it cold. "My mother is sick now," he said. "Early onset dementia. Most days she remembers what year it is. Some days she does not. I visit when I can, but I do not think she knows me as her son anymore. Just a man in a suit who brings flowers and apologizes for being late." Ellie did not respond. She just sat beside him on the edge of the long glass table, their shoulders not quite touching, letting the silence speak for both of them. The storm raged on. The city, always loud, had quieted under the weight of wind and rain. And in that fragile pocket of time, between lightning and confession, two people who had nothing in common sat side by side, tethered by something they had never expected to share: loneliness, and the beginnings of something that felt very much like understanding. The rain eventually softened to a whisper against the glass, and sometime past midnight, the storm lost its fury. Alexander offered to call a car, And Ellie, too tired to argue, accepted. They rode down in the elevator together without speaking, the hum of the machinery and the flickering of overhead lights the only companions to their thoughts. She watched the city blur past the window of the black car, her hands curled in her lap. He sat beside her, not too close, not too far, staring out his own window as if the darkness held answers neither of them could speak aloud. When the car stopped in front of her apartment building, Ellie hesitated. "Thanks," she said, her voice soft. He nodded, but when she reached for the handle, his voice stopped her. "You were right," he said. She turned slightly. "About what?" "Clarity helps retention." Her lips twitched. "I am writing that down." He said nothing else, and she stepped into the night without looking back. The door closed with a quiet click. Inside her building, she climbed the stairs slowly, every step heavy with the weight of everything unspoken. She told herself it was just a strange night, a crack in the armor of two people who usually spent their days sparring. Nothing more. But when she reached her floor and pulled out her keys, her heart was beating in a rhythm she did not recognize. Across the city, Alexander sat in the back of the car long after she had gone. He stared at the empty seat beside him, the faint imprint of her jacket still visible in the leather. Something about her lingered, her voice, her eyes, the way she had spoken of her family without bitterness, only quiet strength. He told himself he was just tired, that he admired her sharp thinking, her resilience, her refusal to flatter him like everyone else, that it had nothing to do with the way she had smiled at him, half defiant, half curious. The next morning, they were both back in the office, suits pressed, faces composed, barriers restored. Meetings began, emails flew, and New York moved at its usual breakneck pace. But things had shifted. Ellie noticed the way Alexander glanced at her during briefings, a flicker of thought behind his usually impenetrable gaze. She told herself it was nothing. She was just a temp, just a name on a file. Alexander noticed how she paused before responding to him now. Only a heartbeat longer than before, but long enough to matter. He told himself she was unpredictable, and he was simply managing that risk. It was professional. And yet small things betrayed them. A post-it note left on her desk with a correction that was almost kind. A coffee delivered in silence, exactly how she liked it. No sugar, just hot, strong, straightforward. A rare smile from her when she caught him nearly saying something human in a staff meeting. They were drawing lines in the sand while quietly erasing them. When Ellie laughed, genuinely, openly at something one of the interns said, Alexander's eyes flicked toward her, unguarded for just a second. He quickly looked away. He did not like how it made him feel. Unstable, intrigued. And Ellie, catching that glance from the corner of her eye, felt her stomach tighten. Not fear, not anger. Something far more inconvenient. At night, she told herself she was imagining it, that it was foolish to read into anything he did. And he, alone in his office with the skyline burning behind him, told himself he had seen fire before. But not like this. Not in someone who carried the storm in her voice and still left a kind of calm in her wake. It was a Friday afternoon when the shift happened. Ellie had just returned from lunch, a quick sandwich eaten on a bench in Bryant Park, her notebook still open beside her, thoughts half drifting between a meeting agenda and the line edits she had been assigned. The office felt unusually quiet when she came back. Fewer people at their desks, a hush that did not match the usual rhythm. She rounded the corner toward the meeting rooms and stopped. Through the glass wall of conference room B, she saw Alexander. He stood with his back to her, deep in conversation with a woman she had never seen before. The woman was tall, elegant, the kind of beauty that spoke of curated effortlessness. Cream blouse, tailored coat, soft waves in her dark hair. She was laughing, lightly touching Alexander's arm with familiarity that struck too deep, too quickly. And Alexander was not pulling away. He was smiling. Not the cold, unreadable curve he offered in meetings. This one was real, relaxed, like he had been disarmed, but did not mind. Ellie stepped back instinctively, her heart stuttering. The woman leaned in, whispering something, and Alexander nodded. A slow, knowing nod. Ellie did not wait to see more. She turned and walked away before either of them noticed her. Back at her desk, she stared at her computer screen without seeing a single word. It should not matter. Whatever, or whoever, that woman was, Alexander was not hers. Ellie knew this. She was a temporary employee, a name on a spreadsheet, The kind of girl who took night shifts and $8 pizza when the paycheck came late. Not someone who belonged in glass towers or beside men whose lives were paved in stock options and legacy. Still, something twisted in her chest. A cold, bitter ache that crept through her ribs and settled in her lungs. Later that day, she caught snatches of conversation. Whispers by the elevators. Cecilia Blake, venture capitalist, ex-fiancée. Rumor is, one assistant said, they almost bought a place in Milan together. Still friendly, another murmured, or something friendlier. Ellie stopped listening. By 5 o'clock, she had cleared her browser history, packed her things, and sent a single-line email to the HR liaison from the temp agency. Effective end of day, I'm withdrawing from the placement at Blackwood Global. Thank you for the opportunity. No dramatic exit, no confrontation. She just walked out. No one stopped her. Not even him. Outside, the city was thick with early evening haze. Lights blinked to life in the windows above, and traffic coughed its way through the avenues. Ellie walked fast, head down, fists tucked into her coat pockets like she could hold herself together by sheer force. Behind her, the revolving doors of Blackwood Tower spun as if nothing had changed, and inside, Alexander stood alone in his office, unaware that just 2 floors below, someone had left. Quietly, completely, before he could realize that she had meant more than he had allowed himself to believe. The leak broke 3 days after Ellie disappeared. It began with a headline, small, subtle, almost forgettable, buried beneath the noise of tech mergers and market volatility. But within hours, it spread like gasoline meeting flame. A confidential internal proposal from Blackwood Global, detailing the early-stage blueprint of a multi-billion-dollar merger, had found its way into the hands of a financial blog infamous for its ruthless scoops. The fallout was immediate. Stock trembled, clients called, legal scrambled. And in the heart of the storm, questions bloomed like rot. How had the leak happened? Who had access? Who had motive? The list of suspects narrowed quickly. The document had only circulated among 5 key executives and 1 assistant. A temp, no longer employed, no longer reachable. Ellie's name surfaced in a closed-door meeting with the board before Alexander even knew it had begun. She left without notice, someone said, a day before the leak. A convenient coincidence, when another chimed in. She worked closely with the communications team. She would have seen the early drafts. She had no clearance, Alexander countered, but his voice lacked conviction. His mind was still circling the email she had never sent. The resignation that came not with bitterness, but silence. The silence that now felt suspicious. She walked out, said Vice Chair Levine, voice hard. People who walk out rarely do so without a reason. Alexander leaned back in his chair, jaw tense. He hated this. Speculation masquerading as truth. Decisions drawn from gut instinct and paranoia. But worse than that was the way Ellie's absence had settled in his days, like an ache he refused to name. And now this. If she is innocent, someone said, then she will come forward. But she had not. She had vanished. A week passed, then 2. Internally, the company held its line. No public comment, no names. But whispers leaked faster than press releases ever could. People remembered the girl who argued with the CEO in meetings, the girl who worked late and left early and vanished without goodbye. By the 3rd week, an online forum had posted a blurred photo of her leaving the building on her last day. No caption, no context, but the damage was done. Alexander called her number. No answer. He emailed. No reply. He even called the agency, only to be told she was no longer accepting assignments. In board meetings, they continued to talk about the assistant, as if she had no name, as if she had not once made him coffee without asking and said things no one else dared to say. She is a liability, someone said flatly. The sooner we disassociate, the better. He should have said something then. He should have stood up and spoken her name aloud, claimed her, defended her, demanded proof before punishment. But he did not. Not because he believed she had done it, but because he was afraid. Afraid that if he stood for her, and she had betrayed him, he would not recover from the blow. And so he said nothing. And by saying nothing, he told the world everything it needed to hear. It unraveled quietly as most truths do. Not with drama, not with applause, but with the quiet, irrefutable sound of evidence clicking into place. The IT department, under mounting pressure and threats of external audit, had dug deeper into server logs, internal transfers, and offsite access points. And one afternoon, Tucked between two mundane reports and a flagged anomaly, the breach was found. It had not come from Ellie's credentials. It had come from someone far closer to Alexander. Liam Carter, executive assistant to the head of strategy, 6 years in the company, trusted, clean, invisible. Until now, an unauthorized data download, a temporary cloud route rerouted through a foreign VPN, a poorly timed login from an airport lounge on the same day Ellie walked away. Sloppy, desperate, and quiet, until someone finally looked at the right file at the right hour. When Alexander read the report, he felt cold. Not angry, not vindicated, just cold. He summoned Liam to his office. No shouting, no fury, only a single question. Why? The man stared back, jaw tight, eyes dull with the resignation of someone who had already been caught by his own conscience. I was passed over for the Berlin expansion, he said simply. Twice. I figured if I made a little noise, forced some restructuring, maybe it would open a door. Alexander dismissed him with a single word. Security! 2 guards came. Liam did not argue. He did not ask for mercy. By evening, he was gone. But the damage had already been done. Not just to the company, to Ellie. Her name had been tossed around rooms like a liability. Her face dissected by strangers who had never spoken to her. Her silence twisted into guilt. And Alexander had let it happen. He had let it happen. He sat in his office long after dark, the city humming beneath him, glass cold against his forehead as he stared out at a world where she no longer was. He had tried to rationalize it all before. The leak, her sudden exit, her silence. He had convinced himself it made sense, that she had walked away for her own reasons, that she had nothing more to say. But now he saw it clearly. She had been hurt, not by accusation, but by absence, by his silence. By the one person who should have known better and said nothing. He searched again. Old messages, the agency database, social media, a trail of shadows and vanishing footprints. Nothing. She had disappeared with the kind of grace that only comes from finality. He thought of her in that storm-lit office, the way she had spoken of her brother, her mother, her dreams of literature, the calm in her voice when she had said, "Do you ever wonder if the person you used to be would recognize you now?" He wondered now if she would recognize him, or if she had seen all along who he truly was and left before he could prove her right. The first time Alexander heard her voice again, it was by accident. He was walking through the lobby of Blackwood Tower, late evening, coat slung over one shoulder, when he passed a junior analyst listening to something through her phone. The sound quality was poor, just a voice, no music. But something in the cadence made him stop. It was her, Ellie. Clear, unfiltered, real. He did not ask what the show was. He did not need to. Back in his office, he found it within minutes. Between the lines were episode 3, The Shape of Survival by Eleanor Davies. The title was unassuming. The podcast cover was minimal, just a soft-toned illustration of a skyline and a woman holding a notebook. No grand branding, no sponsors. But the follower count was already climbing, and the comment section brimmed with strangers calling her brave, honest, necessary. He pressed play. Her voice filled the room. Measured, calm, not scripted. There was a quiet weight to the way she spoke, as if each word was held, considered, then released. She spoke about growing up with uncertainty, about learning to hold grief and ambition in the same breath, about navigating systems that were never built for people like her. I used to think, she said, that being strong meant not needing anyone, that to prove I was worthy of space, I had to earn every inch of it with silence, with work, with sacrifice. There was a pause, then, but someone once told me that resilience is not always hard edges, that sometimes it is knowing when to stop carrying things alone. Alexander closed his eyes. She never said his name, not once, but he heard it anyway. Tucked between the lines in the way her voice softened during a certain story, the way she hesitated before saying, "There was a man I met, someone who challenged the way I saw the world, who forced me to look at parts of myself I had buried beneath survival. He was infuriating, brilliant, closed off. But for a while, he made me believe that even someone like me could belong in a world like his." A beat of silence followed. Then a single sentence, quieter than the rest. And maybe that was never the point. The episode ended. No credits. No outro music. Just her voice fading, leaving behind a silence that echoed louder than sound. Alexander sat back in his chair, hands steepled, heart aching in a way he had not allowed since the night she left. He had built a world of silence, where everything was clean, efficient, under control. And she had gone and filled hers with truth. Not vengeance, not bitterness, just truth. And somehow that hurt more than anything. He listened to it again, then again. By the fourth time, he realized he was no longer trying to hear what she said. He was trying to feel her presence again, however fleeting, however distant. Because the voice that had once challenged him, infuriated him, softened him, was now carrying on without him. The event was held in a converted library, tucked between two red brick buildings on the Lower East Side. A community space, intimate and a little too warm, filled with mismatched chairs and folding tables dressed in linen. Ellie sat on a small stage beneath a string of exposed bulbs, the microphone clutched loosely in her hand. This was not her first talk. Since the podcast had gained traction, invitations had begun trickling in. Colleges, nonprofits, even a few corporate panels. She said no to most of them, but this one was different. Local, grassroots. The kind of space where people spoke from their lungs, not their resumes. She wore a dark green dress, simple with her sleeves rolled to the elbow. There was no teleprompter, no talking points, just her voice, her story, and the quiet hum of strangers leaning in to listen. Outside, the city swam in golden dusk. Inside, she had just finished a segment about fear. Not the kind that makes your hands shake, but the slower kind, the one that creeps in when you are finally still. The fear of being seen, of being wrong, of trusting the wrong person at the wrong time. She let the last words settle before the applause came, modest but heartfelt. She smiled and lowered the mic, ready to step off the stage. And then, from the back of the room, a voice spoke. Eleanor. She froze. The crowd turned, and there he was. Alexander. He stood near the exit, dressed simply in a white shirt and black coat. No entourage, no assistant. Just him. Alone. She did not move, could not. Her fingers tightened around the microphone. I was not invited, Gary said, hands at his sides. But I listened. I have been listening. And I realized I have spent most of my life thinking that being right was enough. His voice was steady, but quieter than usual, stripped of its usual authority. This was not the man who commanded boardrooms. This was someone else. Someone smaller, braver. I was wrong, he continued. About you. About what you deserved. I let other people write the ending to a story I should have fought to keep writing with you. A murmur rippled through the audience, but Ellie only stared. He took a step forward, then another, until he was close enough that the light touched his face. When the company doubted you, I should have stood up. I should have said your name louder than the accusations. I should have trusted what I saw in you from the beginning. Your honesty, your brilliance, your fire. But I was afraid. She swallowed hard. Of what? Of the truth, he said. Of what you made me feel. Because no one had ever made me feel that much, that fast. And I did not know how to be that version of myself. Silence fell over the room. Then he added softer, but I want to learn, if you let me. Ellie stared at him. Her heart was too full, of confusion, of anger still lingering at the edges, of hope she had not allowed herself to name. She glanced at the audience, unsure. Then someone in the back whispered, say yes already. A few quiet laughs, a rustle of chairs, and Ellie finally smiled, small and unsure and impossibly real. I am not the same girl you left behind, she said. I know, he replied. That is exactly why I came back. She exhaled. And this time when she stepped off the stage, it was not to run. It was to meet him, fully, deliberately, with eyes wide open. The building had once been a warehouse. Dusty, forgotten, its windows covered with graffiti and time. But now light filtered through them again, casting golden stripes across our fresh floors and walls painted in warm, hopeful colors. On the door hung a new sign, The Forge, a name Ellie had chosen. It is where things are reshaped, she had said, eyes glinting. Bent by fire, but not broken. Alexander had not argued. He had only nodded, silently tucking the phrase away somewhere deep. The Forge opened 6 weeks after her talk. It was Ellie's vision from the beginning, a community center for youth without connections, without clear futures, without the safety nets she had once gone without. Classes in financial literacy, creative writing, coding, resume clinics, free therapy referrals, the kind of support she had once dreamed of but never found. And she ran it with the same grit she brought to every job she had ever taken. First in, last out, learning every name, listening more than she spoke. She built trust slowly, fiercely, like someone who had earned her authority the hard way and never forgot it. Alexander never took a title. He was just there, quietly. Some mornings he answered phones. Some afternoons he taught negotiation workshops. Not the kind with jargon, but the kind that taught kids how to speak up without shrinking. He never announced himself. He rarely used his last name. Most of the kids knew him only as Mr. A. Ellie watched the way he changed. Not in grand gestures, but in the space he allowed her to occupy. The way he deferred to her in meetings, followed her lead without question. Once she saw him scrub paint off a window frame without being asked. She took a photo, just his hands smudged with blue, and saved it to her phone. At night, they stayed late in the office upstairs, half storage room, half planning hub, where the heater clanked and the floor creaked with every step. Ellie would sit cross-legged on the couch, scribbling curriculum notes on a yellow pad. Alexander would sit nearby, laptop open, listening to her think aloud. They did not speak of the company or the scandal or the time between then and now. It lived in the quiet between them, but no longer as a wound. Just a history neither of them had erased, but both had outgrown. Once, she caught him watching her as she guided a teen through his first scholarship application. "What?" she asked, half laughing. He shrugged. "You are remarkable." She looked at him, soft but unflinching. "You are learning." "From the best," he said. Their partnership grew not from romance, but respect. A rhythm that moved from past to present without force, without need for apology. Love, when it returned, did not rush. It folded itself gently into their days, in the way he refilled her coffee without asking, in the way she laid a hand on his back as she passed, brief but grounding. The forge was not perfect. The funding was tight. The problems were real, but they faced them the way they now faced each other, openly, with effort, with a kind of grace that neither had known when they first met. And in the warmth of that reclaimed warehouse, amid chalkboards and scuffed floors and young voices learning to believe in themselves, Alexander and Ellie built something new, not just for the city, but for each other. The offer came on a Tuesday morning, folded neatly inside an envelope marked "Confidential," though nothing ever stayed that way for long. Alexander read the letter in silence, seated at his desk upstairs in the office above the forge. Sunlight stretched across the page, but the words felt heavy, gilded in expectation. Zurich, Chief International Strategist. A 5-year post, 6 countries, 12 markets. A salary that could fund the forge 10 times over. He closed the letter slowly, like sealing a door. That night, Ellie found him standing by the window, the letter resting face down beside the empty coffee pot. She did not need to ask. She had seen the envelope earlier, had noticed the tightness in his shoulders all day, the way his words had curled inward like smoke. "They want you back," she said softly. "They never really let me leave." Silence stretched between them, not sharp but uncertain. She reached for the letter, skimmed its opening lines and set it back down with a breath. "It is a good offer." "The best," he agreed, "if you measure things that way." She leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You are going to take it." It was not a question. He looked at her then, and in his eyes was something unsteady. Not longing, not indecision, but the ache of knowing you can no longer want what you once did. "I do not know," he admitted. "There was a time when this would have been everything. And now?" He ran a hand through his hair, tired in a way that came from clarity. "Now I know the price." She nodded, not with triumph, but with understanding. "I will not go with you." He flinched almost imperceptibly, but did not argue, did not ask why. Because he already knew. Ellie had carved something here, brick by brick, face by face. She had built trust, rooted herself not in ambition, but in meaning. The forge was not just a place, it was a promise. To the city, to herself. "I cannot follow someone else's purpose anymore," she said. "Not even yours." "I would never ask you to." She looked up. "But you are still thinking about going." He hesitated. "It is a door I spent a decade building, and now that it is open, I am afraid not to walk through it." "I get that," she said. "I really do." And she did. Because there had been versions of her who would have begged him to stay, who would have twisted herself into silence so he would not leave. But not this version, not anymore. So she smiled, a little sad, a little proud. "I will be here," she said, "no matter what you choose." And in that moment, Alexander realized that love, real love, was not about staying. It was about standing still long enough to let the other person become who they needed to be, even if that meant standing alone. 3 days passed. Alexander did not sleep much. The letter from Zurich remained on his desk, unopened since that first morning. He read it once, thoroughly and never again. But he knew every line, every number, every seductive promise etched in it. It was the kind of offer that once would have stirred his ambition like lightning in his veins. But now all he felt was the quiet weight of decision. He walked the city more than usual, without his driver, without his phone. He let the noise fill him. Car horns, street vendors, laughter spilling out of subway exits. No one looked at him twice. No one asked what board he sat on, what empire he built. And for once, he was grateful. At the forge, Ellie worked as always, focused, present, a girl with both feet on the ground and her heart stitched into every corner of the building. She did not ask him about Zurich again. She gave him space. But when their eyes met across the room, there was a stillness in her gaze, like she was preparing herself for the goodbye she refused to beg him not to give. On the morning of the fourth day, he stood at the threshold of the center before opening hours. The air smelled like early rain and dust and something faintly sweet from the bakery next door. He looked up at the painted sign one more time. The Forge. He stepped inside. Ellie was there, hands in her hair, trying to untangle a broken printer cartridge. "Do not laugh," she warned, without looking up. "I swear this machine is possessed." "I am not laughing," he said, "yet." She looked up then and paused. He was holding the Zurich envelope, but his expression was clear, steady. The storm had passed. "I said no," he told her. The words hung between them, bare and unadorned. No apology, no fanfare. Her eyes searched his face. "Are you sure?" "I am tired of chasing rooms that only want me for what I can bring them," he said. "This is the first place I have ever been where I am not trying to prove anything." She blinked. "Not even to me? Especially not to you." She smiled, the kind of smile that started in her chest and spread slow, steady, true. "So what now?" He crossed the room. "Now I finally choose the life I want." She raised an eyebrow. "And what does that look like exactly?" He took her hand, printer ink on her fingers, her sleeves rolled, hair slightly out of place. "Perfect. It looks like this," he said. "Mornings that start with purpose instead of pressure. Work that means something. Love that does not make me smaller to have it." Ellie squeezed his hand just once. "You could have had the world," she whispered. He looked at her and said without hesitation, "I already do." And in that room with flickering lights and half-broken equipment, surrounded by the quiet echoes of new beginnings, Alexander Blackwood finally stopped running. Not from power, not toward perfection, but home. The apartment was nothing like the penthouse Alexander had once called home. It sat on the third floor of a pre-war building in Brooklyn, with scuffed floorboards that creaked underfoot and windows that whistled when the wind blew hard enough. The kitchen was narrow, the oven unreliable, and the bathroom tiles had long ago given up trying to match each other. But it was warm and lived in theirs. On Sunday evenings, they cooked together. Not always well. Ellie had a tendency to burn the garlic, and Alexander still read recipes like contracts, but it became a ritual. One would stir while the other read from a crumpled notebook, listing ideas for new courses at the Forge. Sometimes they argued about logistics, sometimes they forgot the rice entirely. But there was always laughter by the time the plates hit the table. Tonight it was stir-fry, sort of. "Is it supposed to smell like that?" Alexander asked, poking at the pan with exaggerated caution. "That is the sound of flavor developing," Ellie said, stealing a piece of broccoli off the cutting board. "Trust the process." He gave her a look. "You are terrifying in the kitchen, and yet you still eat everything I make. Because I am braver than I look." She bumped her shoulder against his as she passed. He caught her hand just briefly, and neither of them said anything about the way it lingered a moment longer than necessary. Later they sat on the couch, legs tangled, a laptop open between them as they reviewed feedback from last week's workshop. The apartment buzzed with quiet. No music, no television, just the rhythm of keys clicking and a siren wailing far off in the distance. The familiar chorus of the city never quite asleep. "I was thinking," Ellie said, head tilted toward his shoulder, "we should add a mentorship program. Long-term guidance, not just single sessions. Give the older kids someone to check in with." "I like that," he said. Call it continuity. Teach them that commitment matters more than momentum. She smiled because that was such an Alexander thing to say, and because he was right. He looked down at her then, eyes soft in the amber glow of the desk lamp. Does it ever feel strange? He asked. What? This, he said simply, gesturing to the room to them. Us. She thought for a moment, then shook her head. No, I think everything before this felt strange. This just feels earned. He nodded once. I still do not know how to be perfect at it. I would be worried if you did, she said, nudging his knee with hers. This is not about perfect. It is about choosing each other, every day. He kissed her then, light, unhurried, like punctuation at the end of a sentence they had both been writing for a long time. There was no wedding photo on the wall, no diamond on her finger, no fairy tale ending written in gold letters. But on the fridge were drawings from students, pinned beside grocery lists and appointment cards. On the coffee table sat a dog-eared book of poetry. In the closet hung two coats side by side. And somewhere between the quiet mornings and the long nights, between burnt garlic and shared notebooks, between two lives that once ran in opposite directions, they had built something real, something that did not need a name to be complete. Outside, the city pulsed. Inside, the lights glowed soft and steady. And in the quiet, Ellie and Alexander continued, not perfectly, but fully, side by side.